Monday of the month. And for the last 4 years and 4 months, I have had the privilege, the pleasure, and the honor of saying on the first Monday of every month that it was the first Monday of the month, which means it's time for McDougall Monday. Dr. John McDougall has graced me with his presence on Chef AJ Live for over 4 years. There's over 50 episodes. There might be actually 90 interviews with him now, some going as long as 4 hours, where he talks about all kinds of subjects from heart disease to diabetes to autoimmune disease, osteoporosis, and cancer. And I hadn't planned on going live today because the structure of my YouTube channel has changed, where I'll only be doing 1 or 2 shows a week, some pre-recorded, in order to make room for interviews and commitments relating to my book coming out. But being the time that it is, which would normally be Dr. John McDougall's time, I felt it would be nice to just kind of hold space and just honor him at his slot and ask my friend, Dr. Niki Davis, who also is a big fan and colleague of Dr. McDougall. She actually interned with him, to join me in just doing, a little bit of a loving tribute to him. We're hoping to do a big tribute like we did for Dr. Hans Deal once we get the family approval. But I just thought we could just maybe share some memories of Dr. John McDougall at this time. And please welcome friend and fellow Dr. John McDougall lover, Dr. Niki Davis.
Thank you, AJ. It's so nice to be on here today. I feel very grateful that you asked me to be a part of this, because I've been struggling to figure out how to best honor him. And I think just being able to be here and be here when he would be here, and just be able to talk about him and talk about our memories of him, I think is helpful to me.
Right. And this will be, and one of the reasons I chose you, and the thing is all the other doctors, please don't be offended, because you're welcome to come on when we do the thing, the tribute, which of course I'm not going to do without family approval. And people are saying, why didn't you do anything? Well, because really I don't do anything without the permission of the family. Is that when Chef AJ Live started in March 20th, 2020, you were the first 2 guests before it was even a show. And so I feel like, well, what better way to kick off the new YouTube, channel, same channel, but, with the person that's helped me get started the first time. So thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, it's been, I can't believe that it's been that long, that it's been over 4 years now that you've been doing this.
It's crazy. And, I know that you had a regular show the first Friday of the month, but what people may not realize, it's so funny, Dr. Davis, yesterday was the final episode with Dr. Joel Furman. And the funny thing was, I've been sick for over a week now I'm getting over a very bad COVID. And so a lot of my shows are pre-recorded. And I guess people don't know when they're watching live, because I'm still in the chat typing, and people are like, well, why didn't you say anything about Dr. McDougall? And I'm like, well, because this was recorded like 2 weeks before his death, And I
Yeah.
did say something about him the day that I heard, which was Tuesday, and that is right there on the episode. But and I actually missed some shows that week. But and people are like, why are you hiding his death? And I'm like, I'm not hiding anything. I know what what the family said, that he died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 77 on Saturday, June 22nd. That's all we know. And it was, boy, was it a shock, I mean, like, I just bawled my eyes out. And I think I can get through today, hopefully, without bawling my eyes out, because I've been crying enough all week, or as Dr. Goldhammer says, desalinating. But last night I actually had a dream about him, and it was so comforting. And I don't know what people believe about dreams, and if the people from the other side come to visit you, but he was actually sitting right here. So in my office, there is a chair right there. And in the dream, I was doing my show, and he was just sitting here. He was himself. He looked about 20 years younger, which I knew him 20 years ago. And, I knew it was him because it looked like him. And he was, one of the things I love to do is get him shirts, and because he had a larger than life personality and a larger than life taste in clothing. And so he wore what some people might think of as outrageous shirts. And if he was, it was because I chose them for him. He loved the colors orange and purple, and he was wearing one of the shirts, and he was just beaming ear to ear and smiling. And that's kind of when I got the idea, well, maybe it might be good to say a few words about him. And we have some funny stories about him. I don't want this to be all sad, because we got to spend a lot of time with him and Mary at the Plantrician conference. That's when you and I really got to know each other, and it was just so
That's
fun.
right.
spending time with him. And we will share that story because it's a doozy.
It is a doozy.
It's like, I've been saving this one because I was thinking, oh, when he'll come on the show, I'll say it on his, you think about it the next time, but then that's the hardest thing is like to think that you're never going to see the person again or talk to them again. Like the thing is we were very friendly. I have some emails from him dating back to 2007, but I believe he considered me a friend and I sure considered him and Mary dear friends. And, I talked to him. I'm actually even on the phone, very few days before he passed, and there was no sign that he was sick or in distress in any way.
Mm,
But what makes me feel really good is so when we decided to take a hiatus of at least 4 months and not do the daily live show, we sent out a survey of who people would, because we could only do one or two a week, and they voted, and he came in number one. And so I'm so thankful for that. Not that people voted for him, but that because that was the way it was, and that I was able to call him and before he passed, share with him because he often said, your audience has to be sick of me. Do you really every month? And he would do. Here's the funny thing, Dr. Davis, you started having a regular show about 2 years ago, because
yeah.
the first 2 years of Chef AJ Live, it was a different guest every day, which was a very difficult scheduling task for myself and my virtual assistant, Linda. It was really, really difficult, which is why we got the idea 2 years ago to do daily shows. But even before the daily shows, there were two people, Dr. Doug Lyle and Dr. John McDougall, that did have regular monthly shows. And so he would say, aren't you sick of me? And I'm like, I'm not. He goes, your audience must be sick of me. And I'm like, they're not. And so to be able to tell him on the phone that he got the most votes of everyone, I know it made him feel good and it delighted him and it
Yeah.
reassured him. So that made me feel really, really good. And the funny thing is he would sometimes talk. The shows generally go an hour, but there's a few doctors that just like to talk and go a little bit longer, sometimes 2 hours. So he could go up to 4 hours. Sometimes I'd really have to pee. But the funny thing, people would like be trying to reach me. And I can still see a text message when I'm on the air. I can't see email, but the text message pops up. Where are you? What's our meeting? I'm like, well, I'm live with my. Well, tell him to stop talking. And it's like I'm thinking to myself, why would I ever tell Dr. John McDougall to stop talking? And especially now, having that he's passed way sooner than anyone hoped or expected. I mean,
Yeah.
this is gold. And my favorite parts, because people say, well, what's your favorite McDougall episode? I mean, I thought about that because they're all gold, but I particularly love because you never ended up joining the stand-up comedy class. I hope you'll come
Right.
back. Some of your
I
colleagues,
will. I
but
would love
there's this
to.
thing that we do in the class that Carrie, the teacher, teaches, and it's called a rant. And it's like it's not really stand-up comedy because you don't know what your jokes are or your topic is. But Carrie says, what's going on in your life? What's bothering you? And you just kind of like let it out. And it's called a rant. And from that, we mine the gold. But every now and then he would just get, like his panties in a bunch about something and then just kind of go off on what I would call a rant. But those were just, to me, just like, when he would get very passionate about something. But I think one of my favorite moments, when he would interact with Mary, she didn't come on every month like him. But they weren't, I wouldn't call it bickering, but they, like, for example, like there was an episode where somebody was asking what the difference between a yam and a sweet potato was. And I still to this day don't know. And they were sort of disagreeing about it. And it was just so precious, so precious.
Oh, oh, I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
Well,
That, mhm.
yeah, it's funny. It just was making me think about the interactions that I've had with him. And I've also had a chance to be able to email back and forth with Dr. McDougall and just asking him doctoring questions. He always, like from the beginning, when I started working with him as a medical student, he said, anytime you need any help, please let me know, like reach out to me. And he always would respond. So, I'd have a difficult patient. I wasn't sure, is this something that, a vegan plant-based diet can help with? I'm not sure. I wonder if Dr. McDougall has seen this before and had any improvements. And so then I would be able to reach out to him and get information from him. So that was one thing that he was always willing to help out in that way. But it's funny because I always wondered, does he remember who I am? Like, because he's just this bigger than life personality, right? And he's just this amazing man. And so every time that I would see him or talk to him, whether it was a online interview or in person, I would always reintroduce myself. You know, Niki Davis, I worked with you when I was in medical school. I did one of your 10-day programs as a medical student. And he's like, I know who you are. I know who you are.
I think it's called an idemic memory, what he had, because it always blew me away. Like, he would answer, and that's the other thing is he did not charge people. He would answer, he gave his email freely. You didn't have
Yeah,
to be a patient, and he would answer you. And because like I said, I didn't always have email. I forget what year email came to be, but I took longer to get it than other people apparently, or even have a fax machine. And I remember it had to be before the year 2007 because I started reminiscing and going back and looking at emails that we had sent each other. And I've got to share like one of them that is just beautiful. But I had read his book. It was the woman's book, the McDougall woman's book, and there was something I didn't understand in the book, and I didn't have email if there was email then. And I remember I wrote him at the PO box, and he wrote me a letter back.
wow.
And I wish I could find it. I probably did save it. And
Yeah,
what was amazing is here I am, just a regular person that can barely check my email because I get so many. And yet, when you emailed him, you push send, and then the answer is there.
I know.
It was almost instant. But I think he did remember you because I think he did have what's called that idemic memory. Because when you would ask him a question, or when guests, viewers would ask questions on the show, he would say, well, please refer to my November 2016 newsletter.
I know.
I mean, like, how do you
I
know that? He
know.
should have gone on Jeopardy, but he just
Amazing memory. I mean, the studies that he would be able to just pull out, oh, this study this year was done at this university, showed, this many people, and this is what it showed, and it was called this. I mean, it was just like, how do you keep all of that in there? That's just amazing to me.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because well, and I'm thinking about another funny memory, and I'm trying to, when you do over 2,000 shows and over 50 with Dr. McDougall, I can't remember every moment of every show. So I don't know if this happened on Chef AJ Live or somewhere else that we were together, but it was fairly recent. And there's a photo of him that's often gets shown in PowerPoints where he's a very young man and Mary's very young, and they're like on a bed and there's a cat. And he was, I think, a very, very handsome man.
Yeah.
And so I remember he's showing them, and I'm like, oh my God, you were so handsome. And he goes, what do you mean were? But I remember meeting him. Well, actually, no. So honestly, I was like you, like to me, he was larger than life because even before I got into this space, my mother had his books. She didn't read them or she didn't do it, but I had already kind of known about him. And in 2001, it was right after the attack on the World Trade Center, September 11th. So it was shortly thereafter that Jeff Nelson of VegSource had his first of what was going to be many live conferences. And Dr. John McDougall was the keynote speaker. John Robbins was there. And I remember hearing Dr. McDougall speak for the first time. And it was because of that lecture that my husband became vegan with the next meal. And
Really?
that was 2000 and what? No, it was 2001 when September 11th happened. So we had already
Right.
been married 6 years. When I married my husband, I said, look, I'm vegan because I was vegan since I'm 17. I'm an ethical vegan. I go, look, you can eat what you want. But if we get married, the wedding's vegan. And if we have kids, the kids are vegan and the house is vegan. And so, you know how men are. It's not like he took out the grill. He would maybe have, some seafood if he was out for dinner, but he was basically vegan by proxy. But after
Right.
hearing Dr. McDougall speak in September of 2001, and the same thing with my sister, because he had spoken very soon thereafter in her area, they both became vegan. That's how compelling he was. And I remember like I was too shy to go up to him and get my book signed. And I went up to John Robbins and got my book signed, but I was just just too nervous. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
I remember, I never got to tell him this. See, this is the thing. You got to tell people you love or stuff. But I remember to the Jeff Nelson conference, there sometimes would be vendors, with samples. And so somebody had like a Cliff Bar, which is vegan, and it was cut up in small pieces. And he took a piece, and I'm like, oh my God, Dr. McDougall ate a piece of a Cliff Bar, like it was I just remember that. So I finally met him in 2009 in June when he invited me to speak at it was called the Celebrity Chef Weekend. And let me get up my email here because I'm pulling them up. I could even screen share if you want, but here, let me put my glasses on. This is when I had AT&T. So I had written Dr. McDougall a letter on Sunday, February 24th, 2008 at 9:49 a.m. introducing myself. And I gave some video samples of that I was doing cooking because by then I had graduated. I had been out of culinary school for 5 years, my headshot and photo, and asking, if I could, if I could, be involved in any way. And so he writes me back and he copies Mary on Monday, February 25th, 2008 at 7:35 a.m. And
The next day.
yeah, next day he writes, because I think it might have been, yeah, Sunday, maybe he didn't check every second. He writes, "Dear AJ, you are very talented and personable. We would like to have you work with us. I believe Mary has filled the speaker list for the next Celebrity Chef Weekend. I will forward your information to her. Please keep us reminded of your talents so we do not lose touch." So that was really, as they say in the movie Casablanca, the beginning of a beautiful friendship. And I did get to go to the next Celebrity Chef Weekend, which was the following year. And thank goodness, because after that, they never had it anymore. And so I did a good job and, so yeah, and he invited me back, which was really, quite remarkable, because, it's interesting because Dr. McDougall always, yeah, there's so many sayings. I always thought we could have a Dr. McDougall calendar on all his sayings,
Yes.
people want good news about their bad habits. The fat you eat is the fat you wear. And one of the things he often said is, "I'd rather be hated than ignored." And the thing
Yeah.
is, one of the things I've always tried to do on Chef AJ Live is not censor my guests, whether I agreed with them or not. And the thing is I feel like he gave the people that he had speak the same leeway. And I'm a lot less provocative than I was when I was younger. I don't take as many chances, but people that don't know me don't know that really my true passion and what I really wanted to be was a comedian. And so I have that whole background of comedy. So when I came back in 2011, I guess my performance, because it was a performance, because I am performing when I'm doing cooking demos, was a bit provocative. And some of the guests maybe thought it was a bit over the top, but that kind of thing never bothered him, and it didn't make him like, well, I can't be friends with you. In some way, I think he liked a little bit of the spark or the controversy, because I was floored that he invited me back 4 years later at the advanced study weekend, and this time not as a chef, because up until then I was just seen as a chef, and I'm glad, because that's what I prefer to do. I actually teach in the McDougall program, the cooking segment, which I
Right.
love. And by the way, the program's not going anywhere. The July program has been sold out. It's still happening, and they're taking reservations now for October. But he wanted me to speak and tell my story, and I'm like, you got to be kidding. But he had such good. He would have been great as a television executive,
Oh,
does some
yeah.
shows, because he had such. I don't know if you ever got to attend one of his advanced study weekends, but those kind of were what I call the Academy Awards of plant-based conferences. I mean, Scott Stoll has risen to the occasion, and Plantrition is every bit as good now. But back in the day, it really was the top to be able to be a speaker at and an attendee. And so that was just an amazing experience. And I gave my epic From Fat Vegan to Skinny Bitch talk, which, people have offered to pay me thousands of dollars to come to their organization and give again. I'm like, nope, that stays with McDougall. That was for him. And I don't think I could give it again anyway. But yeah, that was something. Tell me a little bit about what it was like when you interned with him. Did you actually see patients? Did you just observe? How did that work?
Yeah. So I was really lucky in that when I decided to leave my job as an engineer and go back and do medical school, I knew why I was doing it. I knew I wanted to become a physician so that I could help people get well the way that Dr. McDougall has been able to do. Um, and he is a big inspiration for me. And in fact, he wrote The Starch Solution. It came out the year that I started medical school. And so that just like really was such an amazing book to help start my journey of training. But I knew from the get-go that that was what I wanted to do. And especially after learning about him and how he was able to heal people and help people get well finally and reverse chronic diseases, I thought this is the kind of doctor that I want to be. And so I had the opportunity to start seeking out those opportunities. And of course, he was the first one that I said, I need to be able to work with Dr. McDougall. I need to be able to see what he does and get to experience what he gets to do for his work. And so I thankfully was able to go to one of his 10-day live-in programs in Santa Rosa back in 2016. So I would have been a third-year medical student at that point. But it was the experience. So he had a nonprofit so that the medical students can come and stay and eat and be part of the program without having to spend their own money. So it was all covered as a student, and that was huge. And then during those 10 days, not only did you get to be a quote unquote participant, because he would allow you to get your labs done before and after so that you could see for yourself what changes were happening during those 10 days of eating just McDougall plan, those entire 10 days. But also, so I got to be part of the group and part of the community and listen in on lectures. And then in addition to that, I got to be a medical student. So I got to sit in on his appointments, his one-on-one appointments with everyone. And you got to remember, these live-in programs, he had 40 or 50 people attending every time. So he would see the patients every few days during those 10 days. So it wasn't like you just got one appointment with him. It was like you got an appointment at the beginning, one in the middle, one at the end. And so he was constantly seeing people throughout the day. And so I got to be kind of a fly on the wall, seeing what does Dr. McDougall do one-on-one with his patients. So being able to be there and get to witness that, not only seeing how does he talk to people and how does he describe making these changes to people, but what does he do? So how does he deal with decreasing insulin or decreasing blood pressure medications? But then also getting to see the stories of the people that he would work with, seeing the interaction with those patients and watching them over those, it's a short 10 days, but getting to see them improving over that time. I already knew what I wanted to do, but that experience is really what showed me it is possible to be able to be the kind of doctor that he is, to be able to actually see people get well. And it was so inspiring. And to this day, he will be my number one mentor. I mean, number one, I wouldn't be here doing what I'm doing. I wouldn't be pinching myself every day for what I get to do with my life if it weren't for him, because he is truly who made me see that a human diet can be healthy and delicious and sustainable. And if you just follow eating the right kinds of foods, it can be a wonderful way to live, and it can help people finally get well. And then not only that, it's also showing people something that I think a lot of people want to see, is that it can improve their own health, right? Because for some people, like you and I are both ethical vegans as well. And for some people, it's enough to say, I don't want to pay for cruelty to animals anymore. I don't want to harm the planet anymore. But I think that for a lot of people, if you can tell them, hey, you don't have to live this way anymore, your health doesn't have to be this poor anymore, you can actually thrive and have a wonderful, long, healthy life. That for a lot of people, that's the final thing that allows them to finally make the change to eating more plant food.
Well, I really like that you agree with him. I mean, well, Steph says, can you talk about your 5 favorite McDougall quotes? And we've already said 3 of them, but there's a quote by Dr. Goldhammer that I like, where he always talks about, I assess a person's intelligence on how much they agree with me. And the thing is, what I worry about Dr. Davis is, that when I say who's going to fill his shoes, nobody, because nobody can fill shoes like that. But who's going to carry the torch that the low-fat diet is safe and effective? Because there are so many other voices out there telling us other things that make us fear potatoes and fear rice and fear a low-fat diet, even though, that Dr. Greger always credits the Pritikin diet with saving his grandmother's life, and
Right.
all the patients of Dr. Esselstyn who do it seem to be thriving. I worry now who's who's going to be the low fat guru, or is that going to just be forgotten?
I know. Yeah. It's I don't know. I think that even though he left us too soon, he left such I mean, he just was an inspiration to so many people that I'm hoping that, I mean, he was a huge inspiration to me, and I certainly plan on continuing to preach what he started, because it's made a huge difference in my life and in my patients' lives, right? I'm not just listening to him and saying, oh, that makes a lot of sense, I'm going to start preaching that to other people. I actually got to see improvements in myself and in my family and in my friends. And now in my patients, I'm getting to see those same improvements by following the things that he has been talking about for a long time. A low fat, whole food, plant-based diet, right? The starch-based, a
Well,
starch diet.
you're a great spokesperson for it because you're healthy, you're vibrant, you're young, you're beautiful. You had a weight story. I mean, you weren't
Mhm.
huge, but yeah, it was significant. The amount of weight you had before. I mean, it was a,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I mean, I lost, I probably was 40 pounds more than I am now. And not only that, but during those 10 days of working with him as a medical student, you think I was already vegan because I had gone from being vegetarian as a teenager to then transitioning to being vegan in my 20s. So when I got to work with him, I was in my 30s. So I was already vegan. And I felt like I was fairly healthy vegan. But even working with him during that 10-day period, my cholesterol dropped by a lot. So even just getting to see, like, wow, the difference between eating, a plant-based diet that has more processed foods and oils in it, how big of a difference it can make to transition to really a starch-based, low-fat, plant-based diet. That's what made the difference for me, honestly. It, being vegan absolutely helped, but it was not until I really followed true to what Dr. McDougall recommends that I really saw the huge health benefits in myself.
Yeah, I love how he says it's never not worked. And, people worry because if they're diabetic, of course their blood sugar goes up when they eat this way. But when they actually do it in the framework of the 12-day McDougall program, and Dr. Lim is coaching them and, working with them if they're on medications, I mean, that's one of the things that's been so cool about being the cooking instructor for the program for the last 4 years is I get to be a fly on the wall and, attend the lectures anonymously if I want. And, you see these patients in 12 days get well. It's incredible, like you did,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I tell my patients the same thing where they say, well, I just don't know if I eat this many potatoes, or if I go back to starting to eat carbs again. And I tell them, if you eat this way, if you can sustain this way of eating, it works every time. Okay, you're not going to, for some people, if you've been living with diabetes for decades, you're not going to be able to reverse it the same way that somebody who's 25 or 30 might be able to reverse their diabetes, but it always works. It's always something that you can find benefit from. You can always feel better and improve your health by eating that way.
yeah.
And by the way, it's such a wonderful way to live, right? I mean, I love food. I love food. It's not like I eat this way because, like, oh, I could take it or leave it. I love food. And so finally his message was, listen, you can eat those comfort foods that you've always craved, right? The potatoes, mashed potatoes, sweet potatoes, rice and beans. These are the foods that large populations of people have been successfully eating for hundreds of years. Corn, and so thinking about it that way, that okay, I don't have to just eat salad every day if I'm going to be a plant-based eater, right? No, you got to eat those starches. And that's really, I think, what makes a big difference for a lot of people is that you can enjoy the food that you're eating because you're eating starches. And honestly, and so when the starch solution came out, it was like ding ding ding, like that's it.
Yeah.
That is what makes sense for a human
Yeah.
diet.
There's some people watching, they probably might be new to my channel saying, well, why did he die? Because he was vegan. Well, I have news for you. Being vegan is always 100% fatal because being human is 100% fatal. So yes,
Yeah.
vegans do die, and longevity, I think a lot, Dr. Lyle has a regular spot on my show tomorrow. And maybe he'll address this, that longevity has mostly to do with genetics more than any other factor in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and I remember hearing Dr. McDougall say on a few different occasions that I personally heard is, Dr. McDougall will die one day, and I'm
Why
not
did it
immortal.
now? Why did it have to be now?
I know, but he knew, and that's where he realized like, eating this way is no, it's not, doesn't mean that you're going to live forever. You're not going to, just continue to go on. Eventually, everybody's going to have to go.
Yeah, but
Um,
he went out on his own terms and he went out strong and healthy and vibrant with
yeah,
cognitive decline. Dr. Peter
yeah,
Roberts wrote me this morning, and because he wants to do a tribute to him, just talk about him for 2 hours, and that's fine. And he'll do that on, I believe it's Sunday, July 9th at 9 a.m. Pacific time. But maybe because you're a doctor, you can explain what a lacunar stroke is, because I think a lot of people don't realize, and like if you saw him at the conference, he had a limp, he had a cane, but he had this as a very young man at 18. And what is that type of stroke, and how is it different than like other kinds of strokes? Because a lot of people don't survive those strokes to begin with, was my understanding.
right, right. Well, there is a difference. The strokes that we typically think about are similar in, like a heart attack, where you've got plaque buildup and inflammation in your arteries over years and years. And eventually you have a rupture, and that causes a blockage. You can also have a blood clot that travels to your brain and causes it to not be able to get the blood flow that it needs to certain areas. And that's what a lot of people think of a stroke. But having one at a very young age is typically a different situation, because you don't have the amount of years to build up all of that plaque and all that inflammation. So it's usually more of like a dissection, where you have the artery actually opens up and causes blood loss into the brain. And so my understanding is that's probably more what happened to him back when he was 18. Um, and then he was able to pretty much get back to his normal self once he was able to rehab and get through that. And I know he still always had a little bit of a limp. I remember when I met him in 2016, he explained that to all of the participants, like, you're going to see that I still walk with a limp, and that's because of this stroke that I had when I was 18. But I believe, we will never know, but I don't believe that he had ongoing inflammation and soft plaque buildup that would have caused this. And so it could have very well been more of this dissection type situation. But again, we won't ever know.
But it was his stroke that propelled him to dive into diet and nutrition and learn everything
Right.
he was able to share with us. There's some people watching that are relatively new to hearing about Dr. McDougall, and they're saying, well, what's his best book? And I would say it depends what you want. So, for example, if you just want the general knowledge of the diet, then I would say Starch Solution. But he's one of his earlier books, I think it's called 12 Days to Dynamic Health, or McDougall, A Challenging Second Opinion. These are all
Yeah.
great books if you want to know the truth about the medical industry. If you have digestive problems, Digestive Tune-Up is one of my favorite Dr. McDougall books. It has little cartoons. It's really funny. The Woman's Book is great. And if you subscribe to his mailing list, they often give a book a month away for free, completely free.
Yeah.
They've been doing that for years now. But if your weight loss is your issue, then I would say the McDougall Program for Maximum Weight Loss is his best book. I mean, they're all good. It really just depends on what you are interested in.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would recommend going to your local used bookstore and going and find, because there might be some old McDougall books there, right? I always will do that, where I'll search around the vegan areas and try to find some of those older books. But I will say that when I got to work with him in 2016, somebody asked him which book he had written was his favorite. And at that time, he said The Starch Solution.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is really interesting. Let me see. I'll check. I'm sorry I haven't been able to check the chat too much to see if there's any questions. Funniest quote from Dr. John McDougall. Funniest. Um, oh, well, he used to say every year I get better looking. That was funny. Something like that, or each year I get fitter or better looking or something. What we will never know is, he had that picture done where he had, I mean, you can get a tattoo that looks
Oh,
really,
yes. I
so what
remember when he did that.
he had on his chest, and it's in one of his newsletters without an eidetic memory. I can't tell you which one, but it says, "Do not stent or I will sue." Did
Yeah.
he really have that tattoo? The world may never know. That was actually very funny about that. So yeah.
I know. I remember when that came out and I thought, does he actually have that tattoo? I don't think he did, but I think it was
That
photoshopped.
Yeah.
Do
I
not
think
calf.
he was, there were some people that felt his personality was off-putting because he told it like it is. And I wish I had the courage to be more like him, because in my heart of hearts, that's how I feel. But because I'm a woman and because it was supposed to be a certain way, I don't have the ability to do what he does. And I like that in a person. But some people found that really off-putting. But he had such love for the people that he loved,
Yeah.
and I mean, his family, especially his Mary, his children, his grandchildren, if you could just see them together, this was just a fiercely loving man. And I think if
Yeah.
he ever acted in a way that was maybe, I don't want to even say unkind, is the world kind of beat him up,
Oh, yeah. And even, so when you and I were at that plantrician conference last year, one of the things that he said was when he figured out what was going on with chronic disease, and I mean, he spent every day in the library researching what is the healthiest human diet out there. And when he figured out, wow, people are killing themselves through their lifestyle, through their diet. And I think I can fix this. And he said he thought that people would just be lined up out the door, right? Like all of a sudden, now we know what is causing chronic disease and that we can reverse it or prevent it. And he said, and it never happened. We never had that lineup out the door. And so I personally feel this need to show that we can get there. And I think even though he's not here anymore and he won't get to see that, I still think that it's possible. And I think that it's not just me who feels that way. I think there are a lot of us out there, not only other doctors, but just, lots of people out there who want to see that happen and want to see people lining up out the door and wanting the truth. And I don't think that he would have had the same impact had he not be as outspoken as he was and willing to just say the truth. And I really appreciated, especially in the last couple of years, how much he focused on climate change and how important it was that we were taking care of our planet. And he was saying, what good is it to reverse diabetes in someone if the planet's not going to be here in 50 years, right? And my grandchildren aren't going to have a place to live anymore. So he's really passionate about that. And I thought I was really, I was really glad that he was willing to go out there and really speak passionately about that because it was really important to him.
to me, it's important how he's remembered because Wikipedia did a horrible job, basically.
Really?
It's just, I don't know if we can change Wikipedia. I mean, it was what it was even before he died. People write me as if I know everything that's going on with him or all my guests. I don't, by the way. They may be friends, but people would write because they didn't like what Wikipedia said about the low fat fad diet. And I don't know if we can get them to have it more favorable, but I feel like the world never really gave him his due, which is why I was so thrilled. It's funny how things happen because at the Plantrician Conference, you can go every year if you want, if as a paid guest. But as a speaker, unless you're like Dean Ornish or Colin Campbell or Michael Greger, they generally don't invite you back. And Dr. Stoll had invited me the year before last. It was so funny. But it was so late, I had already committed to Rancho La Puerta. And I'm just so glad because if I had gone that year, I would not have been there last year probably because I'm kind of too cheap to go. And it
Right.
was so great to be able to be there. And I thank you so much, Scott Stoll, Dr. Skoll, and the Plantrician Project for giving him the Lifetime Achievement Award. And that wasn't the only one he got. He got one from ACLM. And I remember, I was on a short list of people invited. I didn't go, but Dr. McDougall allowed me to see the viewing, and I was the few people that were allowed to, submit something. And I have this little song that I might play at the end that they did play with that. And it's so funny because not funny, but I mean, I'm still not over the loss of Dr. Ron's deal. I mean, I
Right.
don't ever really get to this is like it's to me like it's just so healing just talking to you, even
Yeah.
if we're doing it in front of people because I've just been calling people like all week, like it just I mean, what are you going to do? Because I don't want to bother the family. And
I know.
I do text Mary and Heather occasionally a heart or a potato. I mean, you never know what to do. Like when people pass, do you bug them? Do you not bug them? Hopefully, I don't think they'll be watching this, but if they do, we love you and we're here for you. We'll do anything. But
Yeah.
so I've just been calling, the people that knew and loved him, like his friends of 50 years, Larry and Ann Wheat, who are my friends as well. Or yesterday, I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Terry Shintani. Boy,
Mm-mm.
I need to have him on. You want to talk about a lovely man. It's funny how, sometimes some of the softer voices in the plant-based world are not always as well known, but this is a gentleman in Hawaii who's just 4 years Dr. McDougall's junior. And um, he wrote something called the Peace Diet, I believe, and he bought Dr. McDougall's practice from him when Dr. McDougall left Hawaii for $1.
Really?
He thinks
What?
$1. And so I just, I spend my days just calling people, talking about Dr. McDougall. And we'll be doing, like I said, a real tribute where,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to invite all the people like Dr. Dean Ornish, and hopefully they'll come once the family, I want to get a real okay. But, we're just talking, people are just, we're devastated and we're in shock because, not that, I mean, not that losing Hans was any better, but with Dr. Deal. And it's funny because they both were really like a father to me, mentors, somebody like people that I could count on for my health. I mean,
Yeah.
Dr. McDougall gave me my start. I got to say right now that I would not be, I mean, I'd still be alive probably, but I wouldn't be Chef AJ as you know it in the public if it wasn't for Dr. McDougall. People know me from whatever point of time they know me, but they may not know my history of, unless they read my book of having panic disorder and losing children and not being able to function for years. And it was really through Dr. McDougall offering it. I was trying to do the show. I'm sorry. I had not been functioning for years after the loss of, and Dr. McDougall gave me not only a chance, but many chances to get out there in the world. I couldn't get arrested after culinary school as a vegan chef. Nobody would hire me. I was unknown. And he gave me not just the first chance, but many chances. And so I can tell you right now that there would be no books, there would be no channel, there would be absolutely nothing in terms of what I've accomplished in my business professionally if it wasn't for the help of Dr. John McDougall.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. And yeah, I just don't think that's well known enough
Yeah.
about that. What were we talking
Yeah.
about
Well,
before?
no, and I was going to say, I don't think you and I would not be sitting here talking right now because the other thing is when I started following him, I immediately learned about you, AJ. Like that was how I first heard of you was he would talk about how you had been, eating a vegan diet, but very more high in fat, and you still struggled with weight. And it wasn't until you finally embraced more of a low fat, starch based diet that you were able to finally lose the weight. And so I remember hearing about you and hearing your story through him. And so then it was just this kind of natural progression to as I started learning more about all the other people helping with this movement that you were one of those people and thankfully I was able to talk with you and that we were able to meet up and get together and start doing shows together. So we wouldn't be here without him either, talking right
He
now.
was really a great connector of people. I think I
Yeah,
lost my train of thought because I completely forgot that I really owe him so much with my career.
yeah,
I mean, Johnny Carson gave me my first start in comedy, when I was on the Tonight Show at 27, and Dr. McDougall really gave me my first start in the business and this confidence. And, I don't, I wish that people, I think about that quote, having lived in LA during the Rodney King incident, I think about, of course it was brutal and I don't, I don't think any part of it was good, but I remember, Rodney King saying at one point, can't we all just get along? And I feel like if we're going to, yeah, I don't know what the word is, have any positive effect from Dr. McDougall's death. I wish that vegans would just get along
Yeah.
I don't want to say the name of I was a person that a lot of doctors texted like, and things like that. And, you know, um, not everyone loves everyone and people have their detractors. But the thing is if you are a vegan doctor, whether you eat oil or don't eat oil or eat nuts or don't eat all, we're all basically on the same page of trying to save a planet and a species. And the fact, I mean, sometimes I'm just so embarrassed to be a vegan that they cannot get along because of the egos and the personalities. And it doesn't matter who's right or who's wrong. Everybody's doing their part. Everybody is genuinely trying to help people. And the thing is there may not be one exact incarnation of the vegan diet that works for everyone, but we know that the vegan diet does work for everyone. And maybe you do better with a little nuts. I don't, but that doesn't mean that Dr. McDougall is wrong or this doctor's right. We all have a body that we can test out for ourselves to see what works for us. But you don't have to put somebody else down to lift somebody else up. And,
Right.
and I'm so tired of the fighting and the pettiness between the doctors. And I'm not going to say any names, but I just said to this one doctor, I said, I think it's time to let it go and and to have some forgiveness, because I mean, to me, like I mean, I guess you can hold on to every little slight in the past, but I wish that all the vegan doctors moving forward would just, you know, we're all trying to do some good, and you don't have to put somebody else's program or personality down because it doesn't work for you. Because
Yeah.
the fact is that the McDougall program has worked for thousands. If it doesn't work for you, that's okay. But that doesn't mean that it's not a great program that is not based in science, that has not worked for thousands of people. So I have
Yeah.
to get Dr. Shintani on the show because yesterday the reason I called him is because, he works in Hawaii, and, there's some Hawaiians have a tendency to genetically just become, morbidly obese, so he's
Right.
one of the few people that regularly can work with people that are like between 400 and 800 pounds. And so I called him and I said, well, who's going to carry the torch? Because most of the voices out there, are not about the low fat diet. And he started just quoting me all this, I've got to get him on because he's a softer voice. He actually has a TikTok and a Instagram channel, but he said, well, he started quoting all this stuff about the Okinawans and the low fat and all the work that he's done. So, anyway, it's probably not going to happen and it's probably not going to stay, but I just wish that even just for the sake of them watching, that vegans would get along.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, imagine if all of us took all, because a lot of us are very passionate, right? I didn't leave my job as an engineer working on the space shuttle program, making good money, to then go back and start my own business as, with a small child and becoming a doctor. Um, I don't make a lot of money, but I do it because it's a passion for me, and I feel very strongly about it that it's the right thing to do. And I think that there are a lot of vegans out there that feel the same way. That they're very passionate about it, right? They're not just making this choice, just, oh, I think I'm going to just go vegan one day. No, most of us feel very strongly about it. So imagine if all of us could come together and work together, how much we could do instead of just in our own little separate realms trying to do our own thing and arguing with other people. If we could all just somehow work together, even though despite the little differences that we have, and by the way, they're small stupid differences, they
Yeah.
shouldn't be that big of a
Yeah,
deal.
that'd be a great question for Dr. Lyle tomorrow, but I want to be optimistic, but I feel like it's never going to happen. And I'll tell you why. When I was in my 20s, I was very much into animal rights, and I still am in my heart, but I don't go out there and pound the pavement anymore. I was actually the secretary, executive secretary. It was called the National Pound Seizure Coalition. And what we were trying to do is we understood that we weren't going to end vivisection or animal research anytime. So what we did, and my director, the president, was a lady called Midge Costanza. She was actually Jimmy Carter's first female cabinet woman and very passionate and outspoken. And what we were trying to do is make it a law, and I believe it was passed, so that we weren't trying to stop vivisection. We knew we couldn't. And just destroying labs didn't stop it because they build new labs. But we were saying, hey, you can't get the animals from the shelter. You can't take somebody's dog who's been a pet for 12 years and then, and so I believe that got passed. So I was able to go to the annual animal rights conference in San Francisco. And there was probably, I don't know, 500, 1,000 animal rights groups, all different kinds. And all they did the whole time was just argue and
Mm,
yell. And so, it's kind of like the same thing. It's like you've got, ethical vegans, which are great because I'm an ethical vegan, but they might eat a lot of junk food and maybe they feel judged by the oil-free
right.
vegan. And then we got the natural hygiene and the SOS free, and then we got the raw, you got all these and it's like the diet wars are just ridiculous. I think about my diet as what I eat, but not who I am. I don't,
Right.
it's not my religion as much as people think it is, and
Yeah.
but anyway, what are you going to do,
Yeah.
right? One of the things, do you remember, I haven't had regular TV since 2018, but I remember like Oprah used to have like the after show or the before show. And I almost wish in a way, when I think about, 2078 episodes of Chef AJ Live, just to tape the before and after. But then if the guest knew it was taped, maybe they wouldn't be there. But one of the funnest things about chatting with Dr. McDougall is finding out what he liked to watch on television or Netflix or streaming. And he had great taste. I mean, one of the things we did, and we must have had similar taste because we would share movies and shows with each other. And I felt so proud that I could share my favorite show with him, Resident Alien, which he ended up, at least Mary ended up really, really liking. So, we spent a lot of time doing that and also telling jokes. And, people see us as whatever they see us as, like I'm just like I'm so just a regular, flawed human, who actually eats salt, believe it or not. And but I had some bread yesterday. Go tell Dr. Goldhammer. I don't really eat oil or sugar except in sushi, ginger, which is like maybe once a week. But anyway, so I love telling jokes, and people don't realize like Dr. Clapper is hilarious. I don't know if you know this, but I go to True North once a year just kind of for R&R, and it's funny because he always ends up being my roommate, which is great. And he has a sense of humor and he
He
tells the best
does.
jokes. And some of them I just can't tell on the air, and because, you say anything that implies you're a potty mouth, well, I'm going to unsubscribe, whatever. That's not Christian. But hey, I am who I am and I'm not ashamed of it. But I'm not going to tell it in obviously at the Adventist church on Sunday for my conference. But Dr. Clapper, and I'll tell you this offline, tells the funniest joke in the world about a red eye flight. Literally the funniest joke I ever heard. And I remember just telling it to Dr. McDougall. And I just to see him delight and laugh over a
Mm.
joke that's funny. It just makes me so happy when anybody laughs, but to see that he has just a great sense of humor. And so does Colin Campbell, by the way. So I'm able to tell my dirty jokes to and still be friends with them. I want to respect your time, but if it's okay, Dr. Davis, I found this poem. I mean, I didn't find it because it's a poem that I had heard many times in my life. And if you don't mind, I'd like to read it and then we can talk about it for a minute because it really reminds me of Dr. McDougall. And maybe it reminds you or some of you watching of Dr. McDougall, but I think you've heard of it and it's called The Starfish Story. And it goes like this. An old man was walking on the beach one morning after a storm. In the distance, he could see someone moving like a dancer. As he came closer, he saw that it was a young man picking up starfish and gently throwing them into the ocean. Young man, why are you throwing starfish into the ocean? The sun is up and the tide is going out, and if I do not throw them in, they will die, he said. But young man, do you not realize there are many miles of beach and thousands of starfish? You cannot possibly make a difference. The young man listened politely, then bent down, picked up another starfish, and threw it into the sea. It made a difference for that one. I feel like I was one of Dr. McDougall's starfish.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. And you know what? We're really lucky that we got to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what more there is to say other than Dr. McDougall, if you're watching from heaven, heaven has a shining star now. And We just love you so much. We will never forget you. We will carry your torch. We think of you every day. We miss you. And we thank you for your life's work.
And we will do everything that we can to keep moving forward with it.
Thank you for sharing these moments with me, Dr. Davis. You're a true friend, and your friendship means the world to me.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me on. Yeah.
Oh, wait a second. We don't want to leave people sad. Should we tell them the story about the hotel?
Yes, please. Can
Okay,
we?
all right. Sorry, guys. It would have been a beautiful moment to end, but I can't do this on the bigger memorial with like
We got
Dr.
to finish it with comedy, right?
That's right. You always got to leave them laughing. All right. So Dr. Davis had mentioned when she interned with Dr. McDougall, it was really cool. She got to actually sit in the doctor's appointments with him and learn, kind of how to be a doctor. Well, she actually sat into an appointment that I was at with Dr. McDougall. If you watch the show regularly, and I know it's impossible to watch 3,000 episodes, but there was a question from a viewer about cellulite and what to do about it. And they had lost some weight. They still had some cellulite. And Dr. McDougall said, well, if you still have cellulite, you're still overweight. And so I said, Dr. McDougall, with all due respect, I have a BMI of 18.5. I don't think I'm overweight, but I still have cellulite. And he goes, I don't believe it. Well, when we were at the Plantrician Conference last September, Dr. Davis and I said to Dr. McDougall, I said, well, am I overweight? He goes, no. I go, but you told me that if I still had cellulite, then I'm overweight. He goes, well, I have to see it. And I said, well, Dr. McDougall, it's on my fanny. He goes, oh, I have to see it. I know. So Mary was there, don't worry. And he's a medical doctor. So we went up to my room with Dr. Niki Davis, with
Yep.
Mary, who's a nurse, and Dr. McDougall. And I am the most.
It was a full room.
The whole room. We had like, it was like grand rounds, Chef AJ's.
Yes.
I showed him my butt. And as hard as he laughed when I told him Dr. Clapper's joke, he laughed equally hard when he saw my butt and said, I have no idea what that is or what to do about it. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. A true professional. All right.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone. And think about, all the good that Dr. McDougall did and try to pay it forward. Thanks, Dr. Davis.
Thank you.
Thanks all of you for tuning in on this special Chef AJ and Friends, as I now call it. And we do have Dr. Doug Lyle at 11 a.m. tomorrow. Take care.